Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. I am Arundhati Chakravarti, an associate of Kri Foundation. On behalf of Kri Foundation and ClimArts, I welcome you all to this critical conversation, the first of which will be on climate change and the arts. Critical Conversations is a new series initiated by Kri Foundation. And normally, when the foundation does something of this importance, its founder and managing trustee, Dr. Arshia Sethi, conducts it personally. However, this time, she is not present here as she had to suddenly rush to Canada for family reasons. Her son Adil, who is part of the Kri Foundation, had a sudden and unexpected surgery following a sports injury last month. Fortunately, the worst is behind us. Dr. Sethi has sent a short video, and I would like that to be played now.
Greetings from Canada. You already know why I'm not there with you in the Gulmohar Hall. But I'm so grateful to all of you for having come here this evening. I had a moment for deciding whether I should keep this program going or cancel it, and it was a conscientious decision that we must have this critical conversation. So I'm deeply grateful to all of you, including our speakers, who have joined us this evening. Forest fires, rising water levels, sinking groundwater levels, rising temperatures, melting glaciers. These are all examples of how climate change affects us all. Regrettably, some of the most important leaders of the world are dismissing casually this very critical problem. But this problem was never to be handled by a top down approach. Instead, it was to be a bottoms up approach. For it to be a bottoms up approach, we need to have a large cohort of people ever growing and vocalizing their discontent with policies. But for that, there were many steps that needed to be taken. The first amongst them being understanding the issue. And secondly, finding a way forward so that the demand for climate sensitive policies can be sustained, reiterated, and reinforced. It was with this in mind that the Critical Conversations as a series has been created. With a lifetime of work in arts and activism, I am very certain that one of the most effective and powerful tools that we have with us is the power of the arts to change our thinking and meet the two goals that were identified. That is awareness and action. While visual arts have, to some extent, along with theatre, been able to address such issues, the other performative arts have been surprisingly and regretfully silent. I say regretfully with great care and responsibility because we do need the power of all the arts to make a collaborative and strong impact. In ancient India, the role of the Vidushak in theatre was to show a mirror to society. Why can we not do that again in our times today?
Unfortunately, our keynote speaker, Sunita Narain, has taken ill. She has come down with a fever, and we will lose out on her wisdom and deep understanding of climate change, but only for this evening. Instead, for this evening, we move on to the conversation between the two young artist activists.
Neelambaree Prasad and Neiha Bansal. Neelambaree, apart from being a scientist and an advocate for the arts, also established and runs ClimArts, while Neiha Bansal, who will be in conversation with her, apart from being a well-known development specialist, is also a trained Kathak dancer of the Jaipur Gharana. Neelambaree had a training from Odissi dancer Gauri Basu and has had benefits from inputs by the great maestro Guru Kelucharan Mahapatra in her early formative years in workshop settings.
With 16 years of experience in the healthcare sector, Neelambaree has ingeniously merged her scientific background with artistic practice. She co founded Madhurya in 2018 in London to propagate Kelubabu's Odissi legacy and established in 2022 ClimArts, a groundbreaking platform that brings together artists and climate experts to create and share evidence based climate stories. Her performance venues have spanned some of the most prestigious forums, including India's NCPA, the Shanmukhanand Auditorium, Kala Ghoda Festival, and London's Nehru Centre. Earlier this year, she was invited by Sadler's Wells to deliver a workshop on climate storytelling for the UK based performing artists. She was also the director and performer of the 2024 documentary film The Resilient River, a multi award winning climate themed docufilm on floods. She also performed at the Skoll World Forum, a global platform powering social innovators to transform our world. ClimArts is a global platform dedicated to enabling climate change and action through storytelling. By bridging the arts and climate science, they create spaces where artists working with any media, including writing, reshape climate discourse into emotionally resonant narratives. Through ClimArts, Neelambaree regularly mentors artists to develop climate themed art, including her current work, which is with the principal dancer from the English Youth Ballet. Together, they are creating a docufilm, Fragmented, about coral bleaching. This is in collaboration with the Harvard School of Public Health.
The growing community of climate storytellers created by ClimArts is now making an impact through digital tellings and film festivals. They have impacted as many as 10,000 people globally. Conducting the conversation with Neelambaree is my longtime friend and colleague from my UNODC days, Neiha Bansal.
Neha has recently served as UNDP's Senior Policy Specialist for the G20, deputed to the Ministry of External Affairs, drafting and negotiating the G20 Green Development Pact, LIFE, Lifestyle for the Environment, and the G20 New Delhi Leaders Declaration.
Previously, Neha has served the United Nations for 17 years across Asia as a senior policy expert. She has also worked with the government of the United Kingdoms, both in its foreign as well as its Commonwealth Department, across mandates like social development that intersects with verticals like green transition, climate change, and organized crime against young women and children.
Currently, Neha is founder director of Asianism Retold, a fledgling initiative on development pathways from the global south, and more specifically, the influence that Asian values will have in shaping global geopolitics, global developments, and international concepts in the future.
For this, Neha received the prestigious Asia Fellowship offered by the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. Throughout this journey of development, Neha, recognizing the power of her artistic skills and the artistic language of dance that she knew, never left her practice, even during the time that she was receiving her master's in public policy from the Kennedy School of Business at Harvard University. At the end of the conversation between Neelambaree and Neha, there will be a question and answer and a sharing. The sharing is very important because we need to collate and collect best practices from anywhere and everywhere and build on them to get to the point that we want to. I do hope the audience will participate enthusiastically in this Q&A and sharing. This is where I would like to thank you for joining us today, and I would like to thank you for hearing me out. May I request you, Arundhati, to carry forward the program from this point. Thank you.
Unfortunately, Sunita Narain could not be here due to illness, and we wish her a speedy recovery. We are excited to have in our midst two young artist activists who bring diverse perspectives and create a unique dialogue between climate action and art. We welcome Neelambaree Prasad and Neiha Bansal. Neha, please, a little token of appreciation. And Neelambaree. Before Neha and Neelambaree share their thoughts, can we please have the next video to just introduce you to some of the work ClimArts is doing?
Let me start by saying I think the appreciation is owed to each one of you to come here on a Saturday evening, on a long weekend, to surely hear an important conversation, but nevertheless at the cost of many other things that you might have been busy doing on the Saturday evening. I had been in conversation with several of you during coffee, and a lot of people asked me, what is this thing about climate and art? You know, these artists tend to kind of associate themselves with everything. It becomes a sort of fad, you know. You sort of use current themes and social themes to bring out an artistic performance. But is that all? Is that what it is? And I said, please wait for this conversation. And so we're here to hear Neelambaree on that. But let me start by saying that I don't think any of you will deny the fact that we are in a climate crisis, right? But I think we're also in an imagination crisis. So you have several goals, whether it is of reducing the temperature, whether it is of preventing, sea rise levels beyond a certain point, targets for, financing. But along with these targets and along with the science, what we need is to imagine a world that will be impacted by that, and to imagine that every day. What would happen if sea rise were to affect Delhi? How can we imagine, our city? What would that look like? How can you imagine a Delhi where, pollution is affecting what you're eating? You're drinking coffee and you can imagine sipping in, particles of pollution. How do you really get to that point of imagining it? Because I think what has happened is that while we have some very fabulous data and, a lot of initiatives, climate change is still not personal to us. Until the time it's not personal to us, there is going to be very, very little movement on that, and therefore the arts. So let me bring Neelambaree in on the first question, and this is meant to be a conversation, so please keep your points and your questions, handy. We really want to hear from you. But Neelambaree, let me ask you the first question. How do you really convert, scientific insights into artistic expression. How do you move from that to art?
Sure. So, firstly, thank you for this opportunity. And I don't know if some of you have heard of a very renowned climate scientist. Her name is Catherine Hayhoe. And she's very vocal and actually a climate communicator more than a scientist, and very eloquent. So she says, the most important thing that all of us can do about climate change is the thing we're not doing, which is to talk about it. So this evening is really answering that. And so thank you for being here, as Neha said, on a Saturday evening. I think, in my early years of training as a scientist and watching even my parents who are scientists and growing up amongst them, amongst their friends, scientists are not very naturally, all across the world, not just in India, trained in communicating their science. They are very good at communicating it to their peers, so to other scientists, using the language that that community understands. So whether it's graphs, PowerPoint presentations, data, and one might argue that things have moved to data visualization in many cases. But I would still say that it needs to move a step forward to packaging the information in a manner that it is accessible and resonant. And if you look back in time, innovations in science have always coincided with innovations in the arts. So it's just because there are certain ideas out there in the world at certain points in time. So if you think of Einstein's relativity, which is, everybody knows about it, it coexisted with Picasso's cubism. Or if you think of, because I did study organic chemistry as a student of, medicine, there is this German organic chemist who discovered the benzene ring, the simple benzene ring structure. And as the story goes, it actually came to him as a somnolent vision in his dream, because he was thinking of the Egyptian symbol where the snake bites its own tail. And that's how he conceived that. So, I'm giving these examples just to say that translating science is one thing, and how do we make it more accessible? And we as humans have always thought of and learnt in stories. And we absorb pictures and images much faster than we do text and numbers. So it's quite intuitive to use creativity and any form of art as an extension for not just translating science, but also making solutions more accessible. Because the science and climate change, honestly, we're just seeing it pan out and play out in front of us. Whatever the scientists have been telling us since the 80s and early 90s hasn't changed. We're just seeing it play out. So it's a tool of communication. And with the arts, what we are trying to do at ClimArts is change that culture of climate communication from the technical information to the emotionally engaging human narratives. So maybe, is it okay if I give you an example of a case study that is in the works? We have a learning program, actually a series of learning programs that happen throughout the year, which are offered virtually to artists across the globe, which are meant to give an entry point to the artists in a way that they can use their art form to create climate narratives and shine a spotlight on a solution, find ways to work with climate experts, etc. Now, as a result of these programs, a subset of them are then taken into our incubator, which is an year-long journey where we coach them, we find opportunities for them to dive deeper into the specific topic of interest. And as an example, the ballet dancer, which Arshia ji mentioned in her message, so this ballet dancer came to our learning program. She had done the usual Swan Lake, Cinderella, all of that. And she was coming out of long COVID. And if you're familiar with ballet, you'll understand that rest and recovery is a big part of a ballet dancer's career. And she started to, get attracted to the topic of coral reefs. And in doing so, something interesting happened. So she drew this parallel between her journey as a ballet dancer together with the journey of the coral, where we are not allowing the corals to rest and recover, and hence they are in the shape that they are, which is in turn affecting us. So now the work that is going on, which will culminate in a docu-film in summer of this year, is the film called Fragmented, which Arshiyaji was alluding to, where in the first part of the film, she's going to personify the coral through ballet. And in the second part of the film, she's going to shine a light on some solutions that are being researched at a lab at the Harvard School of Public Health, where they are working specifically with the coral reefs on the coast of Madagascar. And it touches upon artificial coral reefs, it touches upon the migration of fisheries and the impact of that on the nutrition of women and children on that coast. So I think that is how the science and the art, to exemplify it, is coming together for this particular instance.
That's a beautiful, I thought, case study, because I think a lot of the artistic expressions that at least I've seen have been mainly to just talk about the topic, just present the topic either in dance or painting or theater. But I think to sort of go deeper, and I thought that was so beautiful to look at the rest and, draw the parallel between dance and nature. And in fact, I think one of the things that you said, which is really telling the stories, but in telling the stories, sort of recalibrating our relationship with nature. Because I think at some level, climate change at some level is also a reflection of our, relationship with nature. And it also helped me pick another example, if I may. There were these, in California, big oak trees, and they developed what was called water mold. And a lot of these oak trees get more vulnerable to water mold, owing to climate change. And when that water mold sets into these oak trees, it kind of destroys pretty much a large part of the forests. And so there went two artists, and their initial response was maybe we would do paintings. And they did do those paintings, but it was still very passive. It was just sort of giving a one-dimensional view of what was happening. And so they, held a workshop, and they sort of deliberated more, and they eventually took parts of the oak tree, and they created an installation, an art installation called 7,000 Marks. And 7,000 marks are really 7,000 pencils that they could retrieve from the oak tree. And these pencils were then used by different audiences. And each time the audience used that pencil, they were, reminded again of their relationship or the need to renegotiate, their relationship with art. So I think some very, very important points that you mentioned, and also the whole bit on green hushing. I think we're in a time of, green hushing where we don't want to suddenly climate change has become this topic that we shouldn't be talking about politically. Anyhow, I just thought I'd move on to the next question, which was, a lot of our, relationship with nature has been in the hands of indigenous populations and traditional, knowledge systems. How do we really bring them into, the arts?
We in India and generally in Southeast Asia are uniquely positioned, I would say, at an advantageous point where we really have that treasure trove of wisdom to take from, not just in creating narratives, but actually implementing solutions. And I think if I think about it, there are 3 or 4, differences which are very apparent when you see narratives on climate or biodiversity or this entire polycrisis from the West versus from the subcontinent. The first one being that there is a great emphasis in the subcontinent on narratives that are at the intersection of social and climate justice, which in my mind is one and the same thing, together with post-colonial and development type narratives. The second thing is we have the advantage where our traditions really provide us that framing where humans are part of nature, not separate from it. So we can dip into that. And then, of course, the more immediate, the emphasis is also on the more immediate lived experiences and challenges, whether it's to do with farming, air pollution, water scarcity. So another one of our, artist fellows who came into our learning program, I'm just trying to get comfortable with the angle of this. So she is from Indonesia. And she does a lot of work with the UN. She's a stand-up comedian, which, coming from where she comes from, which is that she's from a very conservative Islamic family, wears the hijab. And so doing stand-up comedy itself is quite bold. Now, she's worked on women's issues and, used comedy to talk about it. And she was very curious to do climate pieces. Now, of course, in stand-up comedy or any kind of comedy, unless you have a very good hold on the subject, you can't make fun of it, right? So she wanted to see how can she learn about climate change, and somebody told her about one of our learning programs. And she came in with a clean slate, but with a whole lot of curiosity to do it. And now what she's really doing is she is working on spotlighting local solutions to deal with air pollution, which is a very, very real issue, of course, here, but also in Jakarta, close to where she lives. And so she's using stand-up comedy to shine a light on solutions coming from women and families in Jakarta and creating this thing. So in this case, where we do the matchmaking almost, the expert is the local population, and the artist is her. And the goal really, when such things happen for us, is to make sure that I don't like the term, but I'm going to use it anyway, the global north comes to know of such things, and we get more exposure for artists and the local solutions. So she got picked up by this. It's called, the initiative is called Inside the Greenhouse at University of Colorado Boulder, where there's this professor of climate communication who prepares students for climate comedy. And so she went in there as a way to share her script writing and her process of creating this work. And in turn, it becomes a way for these students to learn. So that's also the circle of impact that we can cause. But talking about indigenous, I do want to show a clip here and then talk about it for a couple of minutes. But let's see the clip first, and then I can talk about it.
Can we have the second clip, please?
So, this docufilm has been traveling quite a bit. As you saw, it's through the medium of puppetry, and the backstory to this is very interesting. So, the founder of this organization called Tora Jamelo in Indonesia is, an urban woman, quite influential. She went to this place called Toraja to actually retire 15 years ago. And when she went to that island, she saw something very peculiar. The children looked very different from their parents. And so she wondered, what's going on? And as she kind of, walked backwards, she figured that the women of childbearing age had to leave that very fertile land, Toraja, where one would actually not leave if one would, not have to find employment. So there was a case of outward migration. And the tribulations that come with outward migration, which is that the women were exploited and had children wherever they went. And then they had to send the children back because they could not raise the children where these women were. So the grandparents were raising the children. And she had been to Toraja for many years before that, and she saw that it was very verdant, and she also wondered what happened. So as a result of the women having to migrate, the whole place was in shambles. There was environmental damage, and the families were obviously broken. Ailing grandparents, nobody to look after them. So she wondered, what could she do? And what she did is she actually brought back sustainable livelihoods in that region. How is these women practice a certain kind of weave. And because there were no takers for that kind of weave is why they had to leave Toraja in the first place. So she started to build a business model where she could build sustainable livelihoods for them and find a commercial endpoint for their weaves. And now 15 years, fast forward, not only has she managed to do that and create a for-profit enterprise that is B Corp certified, but she's also replicated this model on other islands. As you might know, Indonesia is an island nation. So she's replicated this on other islands of Indonesia very successfully. So when we saw this, we really wanted to shine a light on this community solution, which is, migration is a very central climate issue. And puppetry seemed like the right medium because Indonesia has a lot of folk puppetry art forms. And her goal really was for us to take this film to the global north to really inspire people and say that, hey, you can work with indigenous populations, create a profitable enterprise, create sustainable livelihoods, and revive the environmental loss. So and of course, cultural heritage being preserved. So it checks so many boxes. And of the films that we had in 2024, this one, I want to proudly say, has been doing so well. Recently, it was picked up for a climate summit organized by UPenn, Yale, and Princeton. So it's not to say that we need validation from the West, but these are the ways in which we can exemplify and, teach a thing or two, and show rather than tell.
Absolutely. And I have to say, and I'm sure you would agree with me that Neelambaree, you're an ace storyteller. I mean, you started off by saying that, art is really a medium of telling these stories and how important these stories are to the whole climate conversation. But I think in the last 10 minutes itself, you've given us two very, very powerful stories. I think one, really being of the ballet dancer and associating, rest with that of different marine life. And the other is really looking at the kind of impact that climate change has, and it's definitely more beyond numbers, of temperature rising or sea level rising. These are, stories of women, real women who are out there, getting exploited, and what and therefore, the point that I was saying earlier, how can you imagine, therefore, a village of, children looking so different? So incredible stories, I think. Let me move on to, something that bothers me, and it has been a question that I have often had to answer, which is, when I joined the UN and I came from a theater background, I was often regarded as, ये तो नौटंकी वाली है, ये तो ड्रामा, ये जो ड्रामा करते हैं वो लोग हैं, तो ये जो लोग होते हैं, the nautanki people are not the people we want in the room when we are talking seriously, when we are talking about serious policies, when we are talking about serious change. So how, these stories are all important and very well, but how do you really get people to move from being surprised and aware to taking action?
So awareness to action. So I think, there are two paths to a good climate story. And I think you have to work backwards also from the audience you're trying to reach. So in the arts, typically, in performance arts, I can speak more about that than, visual arts, because I'm not a visual artist. But generally, you're inspired by something you create, or you're preserving what you have learned, and you stick to the, not just the framework, but also the repertoire. Now, when you're thinking of climate stories, really, you have to work backwards from the audience. And oftentimes we use this, in our modules when we are doing the learning sessions with the artists as well, is that it cannot be for the general public, for everyone, because then it's for no one. Yeah. So you have to really decide who your audience is, who do you want to reach, and beyond the, emotional resonance is a given, because, art forms are quite potent. So it's not about the just a general message, but what do you want to convey and to whom? And then I would go in so far to say that then the artists also need to ask the question, am I the right messenger for this? So I think it's the medium, the message in the context of the audience you're really thinking about, if you want to go beyond the point of awareness. And that, might I add, has been also the apprehension of scientists who dedicate their lives, and their careers to one very specific topic, go deep into it. Now, if we were in their position, will we feel comfortable giving that in the hands of a storyteller who may not do justice to that? So you have to think of it that way as well. So to move people to action, what is the action you want them to take? What is the specific message? Is it a solution? Is it that you want to, because it's a myth that people are not acting or because there is information deficit. No, information deficit is the wrong lens. Everybody now, to different degrees of course, but knows that climate change is a problem. And the level of awareness may be different, but everybody knows it's a problem. Let's leave the deniers aside for a moment. But so information deficit is not the problem. So now beyond that, they know that there is a problem. The more you talk about the negative, the more you get into a situation creating anxiety and apocalyptic fatigue. So it's about framing with specificity, thinking of the medium of art, whether it's film, whether it's multimedia, whether it's a comic book, what is it that are you speaking to children? Are you speaking to policymakers? Who is your audience with that climate story? That is the first thing to move from awareness to in thinking about, action?
I couldn't help but say this, that, the climate deniers now have a new fancy word. Not my word, but Steven Pinker, one of our thinkers, and he's also a Harvard professor. He sort of calls them political tribals. So anyhow, I'll leave that on one side. But what you're saying is that the artist, I think very honestly, I think you started off by saying that, which was very important, must also evaluate, yes, we have the art and we have the tools, and we can evaluate what tool is correct, whether it's a comic book, whether it's a puppet show, it's a dance, it's a painting. But I think the artist must evaluate whether the artist is the correct person.
Yeah, it's the right messenger.
The right messenger. So I think that sort of raises a question in my mind on partnerships, what are the kind of partnerships that the artist must bring in to have that collaboration between science and art?
Yeah, so partnership is an interesting word, as is interesting, an interesting word. But, partnership really doesn't happen overnight, right? So where we were when we were conceptualizing ClimArts, and we did a whole bunch of primary research to figure out, with these two sets of storytellers, the artists on the one hand, who have the tools and the medium, and the experts on the other hand, who have the evidence and the data, they hold two different parts of the puzzle. Neither has the complete story or the ability to create a story that is in equal measure evidence-based and aesthetic and resonant. So how do we bring them together in meaningful ways? Because typically it's not very natural for them to work in a one-on-one collaboration. So we were really, ClimArts was really born as a response to what we saw the climate experts saying, which is that our discourse is rather technical. It pushes people away, it does not draw them in. How can you help? Right? We want to convey the urgency, we want to convey the complexity. How can you help? And the artists during the pandemic, we really saw, were in a very bad shape. A lot of established artists were struggling to put food on their table because all the avenues and opportunities were closed. So how do we really make them relevant, equip them to tell the story of our times, which is climate story? And how do we bring them together? So it's a very deliberate, thoughtful framework that we developed, which starts with really building trust and establishing a common goal. Both of them want to create a story, a message, and how it's packaged is more the responsibility of the artist, and what it conveys is more the responsibility of the expert. So if we go to museums, etc., you see things that are, inspired by, maybe there are some points of consultation taken from an expert, but they are by and large creations solely of the artist. And we wanted to really change that so that the ownership is joint. And we do not hold any copyright or anything. This is really for them to take to their audiences, because otherwise it defeats the purpose. Then secondly, I think diving deep into the understanding. So the artist coming to it with a level of curiosity and asking the questions, and the expert being patient in really breaking down the message in an accessible language, moving away from the jargonized vocabulary that is typically used. So that's the second thing, establishing a common goal to start to build trust. And we have some trust building exercises as well that we do. Then moving to diving deep into the understanding, and then embracing the nuances and complexity. And this is one of the big things that we spend a lot of time on, because we've come across climate experts of two kinds, might I say. One is those who really are keen to lean into creative ways, and others who are quite apprehensive because they think that this artist will take and make some block message like glaciers are melting and that's it, and I will lose all my nuance. I would rather write an article or a book, which is fine too, because that is needed as well. So we leave them aside for the moment. And then, in terms of the nuance and complexity, it's really coming from both sides. And then we use a concept called bounded imagination, which is really where there is a blue sky approach by the artist, but then the artist is meant to be reined in by the expert to say, is this really conveying what I want conveyed? Is it with certain specificity, etc.? So I think that's the other big step that that we take in in building that partnership. And then we have points of inflection where we come in to make sure that the relationship is going well and that they are working in the manner that is most collaborative. And we've used this in a very interesting, when we started using it, of course, we applied it on ourselves because we did a proof of concept with a geographer, the clip of which you saw, but also with a glaciologist who's an IPCC author. And he, in fact, came to us and said, it's not often that experts come to us. We still have to go to them. But in this case, he did. And he said, I've worked with an artist in the past and it did not work very well, but this looks like it's one-on-one, so I feel like I can have more control and I think I can come up with something. So what can you give me? So then we went hunting in our artist community, found a theater artist. She does spoken word, and she created a poem cycle. And what he really wanted to do is move away from this image of sad melting glaciers to appreciating the magnificence of the glacier. So he does these expeditions in Greenland and Antarctica, and he's often atop a glacier, really experiencing that magnificence. So he wanted to convey that. And that's what we did through a poem cycle. So we used this framework, and it worked quite well to create that, so much so that he's now come back to say, I want to do something else, which I was thinking would go very well with our Sanskrit theatre art form called Kudiyattam. Because what he asked for is, I want to create that feeling of what the patience you need to appreciate the formation of glaciers on a large, long, time scale. And if you look at the Western forms of art, it's hard to convey patience, or at least it cannot be as beautifully conveyed as it can be. If any of you have seen Kudiyattam, it's just another level of an art form. So anyway, that's I think that framework is what really you need very deliberate ways of bringing them together, and it's less daunting for both parties involved if you are able to do it one-on-one rather than one-to-many. But yeah, that's
really great. I think so. What you've said so far is that I think the artist, one is tell stories, like you gave us a few examples. The other is that the artist conveys the emotion, and both with the ballet example as well as with the Kudiyattam example of patience. And I think the third bit that you say very importantly is the role that the artist has in asking the questions. I think that was very important. I had the opportunity to meet several people at the helm of the designing the UPI. And when they were doing that, they said that, we are designing something for a country where, at that time, internet penetration was not so high. There was a certain social, cultural manner that we had. How are we going to really put this into practice? And they said, and which is usually what we do in design, is you wear 4 hats. One is that of the scientist. The other is that of the carpenter, or putting the nuts and bolts. The third is that of the entrepreneur, really looking at where the partnership comes in. And the fourth and very important thing that they said is that we needed to become the artists, to start feeling and imagining what it would be like. And he said that really when we wore the artist's hat, And we were able to then get down into small homes, in rural India, and just understand, what would that be like? What would that mean in an hour or day for somebody making those payments? Was when we were able to really design that. So I think one is the artist, as we know ourselves, whether it's a dancer, painter, and one is the artistic mind that I think all of us have had to employ, whether being, scientists, engineers, business people, so on. So I'm going to open it out to comments and questions from you all, from the audience. And we'd love to have that because this is a conversation. So anybody who would like to ask a question? Yes, please. If you could just introduce yourself very briefly before asking.
I think we need the mic.
Could we get her a mic, please? Anu, I didn't know of your artistic connections, but I'd love to hear about that.
I am Diksha Puri and I'm from media company Media India Group. And my first question is, since you have said to using art to spread awareness about climate change, which we all are aware of. So I wanted to ask, through this way, have you observed any significant do you think that people are taking climate change more seriously through art, as per you?
So, as people in the social impact sector will tell you, measuring impact is quite challenging, right? How do you go from, so which is why the way we measure impact, so we are not trying to go directly to the general public. Our mission is to enable and provide agency to the existing storytellers, i.e. the creatives and the climate experts, who already have an audience to reach. So what we measure is really the impact we've had on these storytellers. So the example, for example, I gave you of the Indonesian stand-up comedian, right? So now she has a ready audience, not just with policymakers in the UN, but also her local population in Indonesia. And she's going and teaching these practices that she's picked up from our programs to students who are foraying into climate comedy, right? So that's the way we measure impact, and that was a very deliberate decision, because to say that we can reach the general public is almost, frivolous and arrogant to think that we can. And then to think that we can measure how it changes their life with one simple story is impossible. So that's what we are doing. We are basically enabling the storytellers and then measuring the impact we have on their creativity and how they are gaining agency. Does that make sense?
Okay, yes, ma'am. Another question, if I may.
We'll come back to you. We don't have enough, but maybe we give somebody else a chance.
Okay.
I think there's a question there.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Ipshita Banerjee. I work in strategic communications and gendering in clean energy and climate. Usually donor-funded projects. Neelambaree, fantastic session. Thank you for all the stories you've shared. What resonated with me, and therefore the question is, I understand that the end goal of ClimArts and most of the narratives that you're building is one, gaining resonance, of course, and also building people to people connects and community impact more locally led. But very often what happens is, once the project is over, the indigenous groups or the locally led action leaders no longer have ownership of the project. So when they are at the decision-making table with policymakers and government agencies, and they're asked why their stakes are significant or why their voice matters, they cannot come up with the tools that are required. This is more like an audience which is well aware and informed and more or less what we call preaching to the choir. But what about situations like that, where would the art be with the artist and the ownership will stay with the artist? Or will the indigenous group also have ownership of the art and will be able to demonstrate it maybe through a video like this when they are at a table of decision and their land is being reallocated for perhaps setting up a pylon for a electricity unit?
So we have not worked as much with indigenous people as we'd like. We're fairly new. So with that framing that we are yet to work with a lot more indigenous people to, come across these kinds of real problems. But in the case of Toraja Melo, because we worked with the founder, who's literally at that, she's urban, but she's also, she's married into an indigenous community, and hence she was at that place in Toraja. So in this case, we are doing, this project was just the beginning. We are doing some other things with her and with Toraja Melo, including taking them to various forums where they need to talk and equip them with things like this. So yes, the goal is very much to have that story be in the hands of not just the artist. In fact, in this relationship, the puppeteer has traveled less with the story, and Toraja Melo, the expert, the indigenous people, have traveled more with the community. So with the film. So yes, and I think there are, when we say climate experts, there are two different framings of it, right? One is there is an artist and there is an expert, because the expert holds the solution and it's all well and good. But in most cases, especially in sort of community solutions, it's the artist who has to be picked up from that local community to really communicate what is going on. And I won't prolong it, but there are two examples of that we're working on, which I can tell you later. One is in Oxfordshire, and the other one is with the non-profit called Spur.
Yeah, and if I may add, I've been the recipient of various donor-funded programs, and we've often faced that challenge. And to me, it's more a design failure than anything else. And as Neelambaree also said, who are you choosing? Who are the artists? So I think it's a design failure to a large extent. And of course, the systemic aspect of the fact that we are often in a donor-funded world. But let me give you an example of Konoma.
I have an example from Colombia's Wayu community. I'm very loud, so I don't really need a microphone. So for one of our programs, which was erstwhile USAID funded, we went to Colombia to kind of get a sense of getting women from all over the world. These were mid-career engineers and energy experts, about 11 countries, 28 women. We took them to Colombia, to a very infamous city called Medellin. To that city, we went with the purpose to have a workshop, primarily to train them both in leadership skills, as well as to give them a better sense of real energy progress that's happening in Colombia. Now, Colombia, unlike public opinion, is in a very progressive way right now, with more or less 40% women in the energy sector, which one wouldn't imagine here, at least today. Over there, we went to one of these Guajira Wayu community events, where the women from the community were doing a demonstration of wastewater to hydrogen conversion through a dance performance. And it was at a wastewater to hydrogen plant. I think it was a fantastic way of incentivizing the local community, also bringing them in to acceptance of this factory that ISA had set up, which was converting water to hydrogen, which otherwise they would be confused about, why is the wastewater going into this plant? I felt that they were not just engaged, they were involved, and they were part of the solution. just sharing.
No, that's where the messenger also becomes very important, right? So, I mean, collaborative community projects have to have.
No, I think we'll have ma'am answer the next question, please. Her hand was up before that. We'll come back to you.
Thank you. My name is Anjali Kapila. I'm a writer and I work with the traditional communities of the Himalayan women for the last 3 decades. And my narrative is actually about women from the traditional communities who are, I would call my climate change experts. Because here there are no scientists and there are no other, they are the experts. They have the wisdom. It's just that they do not use the word climate change or ecological restoration, but they actually live it. And one of the women so beautifully explained to me how the Ganga is changing. So what I've done is I've documented the songs of the river. This is the first of its kind for 350 kilometers of the Himalayan Ganga, from Gangotri to Haridwar. I've recorded the songs of the women about the river and their wisdom, indigenous wisdom about climate change and pollution and how the river is changing. So one woman who is actually my ecological hero, she said, "Pehle hum गंगा में कंकर ढूंढते थे, अब हम कंकर में गंगा ढूंढते हैं." Now, how eloquent is this? They have no PhDs in ecology, they don't go to international conferences and all that, but they have the lived experience. So are we really tapping their wisdom? And there's a beautiful song which she used to sing, which I'm going to sing 2 lines if I may. Ni dali lagawa dali ma, guguti ghorondi re. हे प्यारी डालियों ना काटा मेरी जिकुड़ी झुरौंदी रे. Do not cut the trees because the dove is singing in them. When you cut the trees, I feel my heart is paining. So this is, she's drawing up a holistic kind of an understanding of the whole ecosystem, where the birds are no longer singing because the trees are cut, where the glaciers are melting, and the kind of knowledge they have. So I've tried to document their wisdom in this book, which is a narrative of their voices. So I feel even folk music should be included in the arts.
Absolutely. I mean,
How beautiful.
there is this, I had come across a Pakistani architect who had done something similar. She traveled, along the Indus and captured the lived experiences through songs of the women and how their life is being impacted. And no, we're not doing enough to really, preserve and learn from all this wisdom. We have to do better. There is no 2 ways about it.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. It was beautiful. I mean, I have a question for the audience that your song sort of brought out, but I'll wait to ask that question. There was somebody who was... sir, you wanted to ask a question, and then I'll come back to you.
Good evening, everyone. Congratulations, Neelambaree, on the wonderful work you're doing. My name is Venu Rajamani. I'm a former Indian ambassador, now after retirement living between Delhi and Cochin, where I lead a university there. The university is very committed to promoting sustainability and has a wonderful design department. So I'd love to talk to you about what we can do together. But going beyond that, my questions are really 2. One, isn't the challenge of climate so enormous, so immediate, that shouldn't the focus be on mass audiences? How do you reach a mass audience? What kind of artists? What kind of medium? What kind of messages? And secondly, you mentioned Kudiyatam, which is wonderful. But even there, shouldn't there be a concerted effort to reach people like Kudiyatam artists or Kathakali artists, to reach temple festivals where there is always a mass audience? And both, at one hand, the popular level, but on the other hand, the traditional artists, to go out and tell them, please also speak about climate.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you said is, both those points are music to my ears, firstly. So, unfortunately, we are in the day and age where our bar for consuming content is set by things like Netflix, right? We're not expected to consume things that are good for us for a long time. Patience is, not a thing. Everybody has ADHD. So in terms of mass communication, I think film is the most powerful medium. And one of the, I don't, maybe some of you have seen this, All That Breathes. It's such a beautiful piece of storytelling that combines, the wildlife crisis together with the air quality crisis of Delhi in the backdrop of the political problems that we are facing. So I think film, mass, that would be the way to go. Films definitely, we have to take advantage of the fact that everybody is watching Netflix. So throw content that is, there is this thing in that I'm sure many filmmakers use, but you wrap it up in such a way that you draw the people in, and then you pack a message, a punch that really shakes them up or provokes thought. So films do that very well. So I would say that. And of course, that is where actually we started ClimArts. I mean, for me, it was very anxiety provoking that for the longest time I was going to a temple, doing my dance classes, then going to this closed door exclusive audience for performances, teaching all that, and on the other hand, straddling the whole corporate world. Why are they not, coming together? So that is what created ClimArts, that how do we use these very potent, powerful, ways of communicating, especially Indian classical music, dance, theatre. How do we use that to convey topical issues while staying true to the form? But really delivering those, arresting narratives. So absolutely, I mean, we are trying to reach more traditional, artists in India, and any help from anyone to do that, we, welcome.
The last two questions also, I think, open up a larger question, which is that the importance of art itself and the artists has diminished. For the art and the artist to have that kind of mass impact, I think that somehow has to also be a parallel conversation. How do we bring them back? We will lose out a lot if we allow this to fade.
That is another critical conversation.
Very
in
critical
the series.
conversation, a very important one. I'll just come to you, sir, and then I know there are some hands here. Yes.
मेरा नाम इरशाद, वैसे माइक की ज़रूरत नहीं, मैं वैसे भी बोल सकता
Use the mic, then we'll
हूँ. मेरा नाम इरशाद आलम खूबी है और मैं शहर पुरानी दिल्ली से वाबस्ता हूँ. तो जब यहाँ के बारे में आर्शिया सिटी मैम से पता चला तो मुझे सुन के बहुत अच्छा लग रहा था. सोचा कि जाया जाए, कुछ आइडियाज़ थे दिमाग में. हम लोग किस्से गोई, एक किस्से कहानियाँ, किस्सा गोई एक आर्ट फॉर्म है पुरानी दिल्ली की जो करखंदारी ज़ुबान के अंदर सुनाई जाती है. तो उसमें मुहावरे, कहावतें, नुस्खे यही सब बोली जाती हैं. तो उसमें बहुत सारी चीज़ें आती हैं. तो एकदम मुझे ख्याल आया कि ये शहर के अंदर जो पानी बहने का जो तरीका हुआ करता था, शाही कितनी डालूं चुन्नी सी, पानी कितना डालूं बहुत सारा, कौवे रे कौवे, ये ट्रेडिशनली बहुत सारे बचपन में ऐसे हमें खेल सुनाए जाते थे, बताए जाते थे. जैसे एक याद आ रहा है मुझे कि वो क्लाइमेट पर ही है, पेड़ पे जुबान तोड़ खेल कहते हैं इसको. पेड़ पे तड़ना था पे पेड़ था, तोड़ना उस पे थी चिड़िया थी. तो यानी कि जैसे चबूतरे को लेकर ही बहुत सारे चा के साउंड से अगर हम बताना चाहें तो क्या क्या चीज़ें निकलती थीं और उससे क्या क्या माहौल में तब्दीलियां आती थीं. जैसे हमारा टेसू यही अड़ा, खाने को मांगे दही बड़ा, दही बड़े में मिर्ची बहुत, आगे देखो काजी हौस पे चली छुई, आगे देखो जमुना जी. तो जमुना जी से निकलते हुए कैसे जाते थे, वहाँ बिखरे फूल, क्या क्या होता था. जैसे चांदनी चौक की नदी, कुएँ, उनको लेकर हमें बहुत सारे ऐसे मज़ेदार चीज़ें बताई जाती थी. तो मुझे लगा कि वक्त के साथ जो चीज़ें बदल रही हैं, या पानी वहाँ पे क्यों कम हो रहा है, ज़मीन के नीचे। तो बहुत सारी जो हम किस्से कहानियों में हम बच्चों के साथ, टीचर्स के साथ काम कर रहे हैं, और जैसे कम्युनिटी के बारे में जिक्र हो रहा है, तो हम फोकसली बहुत सारे लोगों को बुलाते हैं कि आप हमारे साथ आइए। तो प्लीज़ मैं आप लोगों से चाहूँगा, शहर में हम लोग काम कर रहे हैं, हमारे पास आइडियाज़ हैं, हमारे पास DLED के टीचर्स भी आते हैं, हम स्कूलों में काम कर रहे हैं। तो प्लीज़ अगर आप कुछ ऐसा मिलकर हमारे साथ शहर में, हम बहुत कुछ मिलके कर सकते हैं। मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा यहाँ आके। मेरी इंग्लिश अच्छी नहीं है, लेकिन मैं बातचीत समझ सकता हूँ, लेकिन बोलने में शायद मैं उतना बेहतर नहीं हूँ। शुक्रिया, मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ आगे जुड़ के काम कर सकें।
थैंक यू, शुक्रिया। आई एम श्योर कि बहुत सारी पार्टनरशिप्स हो सकेंगे, बहुत सारे। We'll take 2 last questions because I know people have to go for dinner.
Hi everyone. Firstly, this is a beautiful session and I am like enlightened, and I see that there's a huge age difference also. Maybe I'm the youngest here because I'm just 23, but it's a wonderful and enlightening session that I had right now. My name is Ananya Gaur. I am from Impresario Global Media Private Limited. We are a startup space who works in the social impact sector itself. And we are basically working on an app, developing a civic empathy app, which enlightens and tell people that how important it is for all of us to become civic empaths to deal with issues like climate change. So pertaining to the discussion that we have had here, ma'am, you talk about art, and I think art is all about emotions. And what we are trying to do is that we are trying to enlighten that emotion in people, that climate change, if you see it as an emotion, you would only then feel connected and do something about it actually. So we as an organization, what we do is that we get in touch with young professionals, people from universities, schools, colleges, wherein we can get to their level and tell them that, you know, these are important issues, pressing issues, and you can use your art form, you can use any other means to express it and do something about it. So we meet these students and kids who are working in theater groups or, let's say, debating societies, dance troops, who are working and, you know, doing Nukkar Nataks, as you said, the Notanki, but so all of these people, they come together and work, and we are like glad that we can provide that space to them. Like sir even said that, you know, how do you reach the mass audience? I think that is a wonderful way to reach the audience, because in now AI generated environment, people are always on their phones. So what's better than, you know, creating an app and, you know, having a platform they can go and talk about it. But coming back to my question, ma'am, I want to ask that how do you create this emotion in people when they're so technology driven, when they're so, you know, money-minded? And how do you think that this art, or maybe some incident in your life and your entire career you saw, that there was, you were able to create that emotional interpretation which data and reports could not do? So I would love to know about that.
Thanks. Very, very valid question for our time.
So I think showing in climate stories, to make it resonate and to make it personal, you have to show real people. Showing polar bears and icebergs and all of this is not going to cut it, right? You have to show real people, not just experiencing a problem, but implementing a solution. And you might want to look at this series of photographs. It's a visual library created by an organization called Climate Outreach. It's a free open access library. And they basically have a little written story with a photograph of someone in especially the subcontinent implementing a solution. And it is oftentimes, you know, a vulnerable person. So firstly, those kinds of things, because images with real people is what is going to make. The other thing is making it personal. So right now what we are focused on, especially in our learning programs as well, is using health. Because what is more personal to us than our own health? So I think something close to us, something that matters, our family, our, you know, our health, those are the things that have to be used to connect with people. An app is a good hook because, like you said, everybody's on their phone. In my experience, I think there is no substitute, pandemic, no pandemic, whatever, to a live performance. You have a live performance, whether it's a Nukkad Natak, a street play, or, you know, something that we do in an auditorium. there is no substitute for a live performance, because you are in that same physical space, traveling the same journey, the audience and the performer. So that is the way to, and we have managed to do that at the School World Forum. When we presented the Resilient River, which is now a film, we opened the climate justice session with it. We presented the dance and we just paused, and we basically asked people, what is the one word that comes to mind? And the words that were, said were things like visceral, moving, made me cry. So I think there is no substitute for a live performance, but if you're looking at an app, you have to make it personal.
Obviously, that is why we also work in the live space as well. So from app to live, we have SMEs who you can go and meet and have these sessions like this. There's a gathering that can come along and work on this. So we do both of it to target the audience online and then offline as well. So yeah, thank you for answering.
And another example that you might want to look up is Konoma, this village in Nagaland. That's really used civic responsibility to move from a region that was a traditionally hunting region to one of South Asia's most green villages. And they have really tapped in on civic responsibility through art and in a very interesting way. So
I want to, bring in an organization called Purpose, but yeah, maybe after a comment there. But just to add to that, there is a maybe some of you have used the Camlin pencils, that we used to use. So that family, the Dandekar family, has they run a foundation called Rain Tree Foundation. They sold the business and they've put much of the money into this foundation that really is about civic stewardship and sustainable development in Maharashtra, in a UNESCO heritage site on the Western Ghats. And it's a long, 10, 12-year project where they're giving stewardship back to the people, training them to negotiate and to answer your point about how to, make sure that you're giving that custodianship back to them, because they are the real custodians of that place. So they are doing that very, very well. And that is the sustainable way to go.
Sir, you've been wanting to ask a question for a long time.
My name is Bagai. I'm just very curious that, living in Delhi, is the media doing enough? Is the middle class understanding what's happening? Why do we have air pollution? There are no protests. And similarly in America, you talk about the universities, and how is Donald Trump getting away with pulling out of the Paris Agreement? I mean, you have artists over there, you have the middle class over there, similarly the middle class over here that don't seem to care. So is that a right impression that they're not impressed with the change that's coming?
So we'll need an entire session or 2 sessions for that. It's on everybody's concern list, what is happening, including the Americans, including the artists. But, little to be said. And I think it goes back to what we were saying, that, you have to have the artist in the room. I think this is, to my mind, this is sort of is an example of things maybe going wrong or going too extreme because you didn't have all categories of people in the room. Just to draw a very quick example, there was a time when the UN started to see that negotiations between countries were failing again and again and again. And they went down and they did several studies to understand what was happening. And, they had all the data on the table and they said, this data is not a problem. The right people are in the room. And then they realized that it was a very, let's say, a hard way that they were approaching negotiations, these countries, essentially because there were mainly men in the room and not women who were able to understand some of the subtle, aspects of negotiation and not become, it wasn't so much of an ego battle. So I think in the same parallel, when you do not have all sections in the room, and I think especially artists, you might have an extreme of what we are seeing now, in this country. I think we'll just bring in Purpose on that and then close.
Hello. Thank you for all the perspectives shared today. I'm Komal, And I'm representing Purpose today. Purpose is an organization, global organization, which is working on the intersection of creativity and social impact. And the way we work is also via co-created stories, art, and powerful narratives. And I think just want to also share a little bit about our framework that we have developed, and some of you might have picked up a copy. It's okay. I can just stand. Yeah. So a principle that we work with is nothing about us without us. So we have to make sure that the social impact that we are creating not only is directed towards the communities, but also involving the communities. So that is the approach that we have sort of laid out in this framework. This approach is based out of all our learnings towards the work we have done with the communities, with different audiences. And it's basically insights, challenges, and some helpful tools that we have found have been really great in engaging with different types of communities. And it's an open source, so please do share it. Read it, share it, use it in your own work. And if you have used similar tools in your work, we would be also happy to put them in our case study library to further, further their impact. But thank you all.
Well, thank you so much to Kri and to Neelambaree and to Aisha Sethi actually for getting us together, and to each one of you for coming and hearing us this evening.
I would like to thank our speakers. That was a very interesting discussion. There is much to discuss, and it will continue well beyond this evening. Unfortunately, we have time. We have overshot the time a bit. So thank you again, and thank you to our audience. Thank you for making this discussion so animated and engaging. I hope you have left your email and phone numbers at the registration desk outside so we can connect with you for our next critical conversation. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.